Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast, coming to you from India. Well, I'm not in India, but my guest is in India. Arun Vinayak is one of the co-founders and an Indian entrepreneur of considerable skill, and he has developed a company called Exponent Energy, and they have developed a system, a completely self-contained system for charging the hundreds of thousands of electric vehicles in India really fast. We're talking 15 minutes to completely fully charge the battery. That I will allow Arun to explain the details of this in the podcast, but it is really fascinating. A little glimpse into what is happening around the world in the arena of electric vehicles, because we can easily get lost in the sort of, is it Tesla? Is the BYD is better than the Tesla? Is the new BMW? There's so much else going on outside the world that we report on regularly. So this is a really exciting opportunity we got to talk to this company and to talk to Arun, who's just an extraordinary guy. I really want to find out more about this company. We want to try and film some of the stuff they're doing in India. It is really, it's game changing. Just a little fact for you: there's 400 million electric vehicles on the road of the world, and 280 million of those are small mopeds and motorbikes and three-wheel delivery vehicles, which is what we're talking about. They're not cars. So the minority of electric vehicles on the road are cars. The majority are really small vehicles, and that is actually having an impact on the oil industry. So, I don't want to go on about it anymore. What I would love to say is we just had this amazing show in Sydney, which was incredible. Thank you to all the people, the many tens of thousands of people who came and attended it. And we're just about to do our next show in London at the end of March, just before Easter. So the 3 days before Easter Sunday. And it's at the XL in London. If you're anywhere near or around the southeast of England, I cannot recommend it strongly enough. They are extraordinary events with extraordinary guests, an amazing array of things on display, an incredible amount of test drives available. We did over 5,000 in Australia. We'll do many more than that at XL. And once people have actually been in an electric car, their whole attitude to the whole thing generally does change. So that's worth looking at. All the links for all these, for the company as well. One last thing I would quickly want to say is the website that Exponential Energy have put together that explains how their technology works is really beautifully put together. The links are in the show notes, along with information about our live show coming up in March. So that's it. So please do welcome Arun Vinayak to the Fully Charged Show podcast.
Like everything electric? Then you'll love our fun-packed Everything Electric expos around the world. Next up, we're in London and Harrogate. Remember, energy and transport professionals go free on the first day.
So Arun, thank you so much for joining us today. This is, it is a first, because you're the first Indian entrepreneur we've ever interviewed on the Fully Charged Show podcast. And we've done hundreds of episodes, and I feel very guilty that we haven't done this before, but it's good that at least we've done it this time. And what you're doing, it took me about, what was really good about the project you're working on, it took me about, I'll give myself, I'll be modest, but about 10 seconds to really get it. Oh, it was like, oh, charging that fast. Oh, it's a wonderful like 3-step thing. How do they do that? Oh, it was that process was really, really good. So it's a fascinating thing. Can you, before we go into detail on how it works, can you just go back a few steps to how you got to that, why you got interested in it, why you thought to develop this, what your background is? It would help, I think.
Awesome. No, firstly, thanks so much for doing this. Fantastic to be big fan of the show. Obviously, you've seen a whole bunch of episodes. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
Yeah.
Just India is going through this crazy EV boom, and so you should absolutely come down.
We've got to come, yeah.
And what's happening? It's a very different problem set, different price points, different form factors. But EVs nevertheless. Just to introduce myself, I'm Arun. I love mobility. I've been building vehicles since I was fairly young, mostly open wheel go-karts and race cars, and sort of hacking my way through college that way. And along the way, realized that EVs are a thing, and it's this once in a century tectonic shift that's happening. And feel lucky enough that it's timed in a place where I can get to be part of it. So we said, okay, let's start a company. So 2013, 2014 started this company called Aether Energy. I was one of the founding partners, and I was the chief product officer. Where I joined a bunch of others who started this company, and this was about electric two-wheelers and bikes.
Yeah.
This was 2013. It wasn't very popular to be building EVs back then. It was considered borderline stupid, and but of course there was Tesla. We were very inspired by
Yeah.
Tesla. Back then, electric vehicles in India were this really low speed, really ugly looking contraptions that people imported from China. There was no pride in that vehicle, so we said, let's just make EV vehicles the best. So we said, let's build the best two-wheeler. And India is a huge two-wheeler market, so we buy like 20 million two-wheelers a year. So we launched Aether in 2013. It's now doing really well. It's one of the leading electric two-wheelers manufacturers in India.
So the company is still going now. It's still
It's a $400 million
great.
plus revenue. It's a top 3, top 4 every month. So it competes with the biggies. It's considered one of the best two-wheeler products on Indian roads. So beating the petrol and the large motorbikes. So that's doing well.
Right.
Around 2020, decided to start Exponent because what we realized is the vehicle problem is solved. Today, when you buy an EV, it drives better, it looks better, it's fundamentally better in every regard with respect to vehicle ownership. The problem is energy. Everything about the energy ecosystem holds you back from adopting this. Of course, the early adopters are going through the hoops to adopt, to owning and operating an EV. Everything from where do I charge, how long will it take, will my battery last, what's the cost of all of this. If you really break it down, it's not a vehicle problem, it's actually an energy ecosystem problem. It's about batteries, charging, and how the whole ecosystem sort of put together. And so we realized if all of us need to go electric today, it's not about building more and more vehicles. It's about simplifying the underlying energy problem, right? And so that's what Exponent's all about. We want to make energy for EVs simple, seamless, and as easy as petroleum.
Yeah. And then, did the notion of the extreme rapid charging system that you've developed now, was that the first thing you did, or did that really come out of you starting to build the vehicles and then realizing this was coming later? I mean, which came first? I suppose was because what you've done is truly remarkable. I mean, no one else has done it anywhere near as well.
Like I said, so 2013 to 2020 was deep building vehicle. Back then, the vehicle side technology itself wasn't evolved, and it was evolving. And of course, by then we had already put out like 200,000 units of sorts, so sort of really learned on the ground. And we started seeing a bunch of problems, right? Problem statement one was, and this is not a tech-led solution, but I guess a problem-led. We started identifying on the problem first, and the solution came later, not the other way around. So we realized on one side, charge point operators were setting up charging stations, but they're only charging 2-3 vehicles a day. So it was fairly, it was a really bad business, right? And it really came down to charge time. So you had a lot of these dead assets. Either they were not making money, or they were charging this ridiculous fee,
high price
to the end, high price to the end user. Second, vehicle manufacturers had to start selling vehicles with larger and larger batteries. The question of how much range is enough is never enough. So vehicles just kept getting heavier and more expensive to own. And on the other end, the end users still buying an expensive vehicle, can't charge it, and it's limited operational flexibility, high price. So there were a whole bunch of these compromises that everyone in the ecosystem was taking. And we realized rapid charging was this golden bullet that can just solve it for everyone. Right, and so the problem statement was very clear. That and just to double down on the Indian, and maybe I'll send some pictures across later. India doesn't park at home, right? And so when you look at Australia or US or European market, the common conception is I park at home, so I charge at home, right, overnight. Public charging is during road trips, so in 45 minutes, 1 hour is good enough. Second thing is India can't afford large batteries, right? So like something like a more advanced economy can probably consumers can probably pay 300, afford a 300 to 500 kilometer range vehicle, right? Most segments in India can't afford more than 80 to 100 kilometers worth of range, right? So India needs like ultra small batteries and ultra fast
Yeah.
public charging, because I'm going to use public charging every day. I'm like, because I
Yeah.
can't charge at home. So even 1 hour was too much, right? So we realized we need a sub 10-minute charging transaction where you get in, get
Right.
out. Literally, you recharge like you refuel. So
Yeah.
that's the only way to make both cost structures and flexibility work. Really small batteries
Right.
and really fast charging. And so,
Right.
so that's the sort of problem statement we focused upon. And
Right.
we started with commercial vehicles, obviously, because that's like, in some sense, a power user for
Well,
our technology.
I mean, from my limited experience in India, there's a lot of small commercial vehicles is a very common sight in Indian cities. There's a lot of them around,
Yeah.
isn't there?
They
So,
are. So if you look at cities, these small commercial vehicles are the highest consumer of energy, right?
right,
In cities, and so in India, commercial vehicles, they're only 10% of vehicles, but they consume
right,
70% of our on-road energy, right?
right, right.
Right. So the segment of that needs to go electric from a sustainability point of view is also the commercial vehicles in India. So
Yeah,
and of course that's a segment that needs flexibility the most. A lot of us go home, office, back. So flexibility is actually least needed in a passenger segment. But when it
yeah,
comes to commercial vehicles, they're always clocking kilometers. They're going
yeah,
all over the place. So
yeah,
geographically, number of kilometers wise, they need a lot of flexibility and freedom.
yeah.
So we decided to electrify that segment using our technology.
And also at the moment, then, I mean, from my limited experience, the three-wheeled delivery vehicle, box on the back, small cabin on the front, two wheels at the back, one at the front. They were generally, from what I can remember, like a two-stroke petrol engine, or they were certainly not the cleanest burning combustion engines. So there was a lot of them in a city producing a lot of gases, and that's quite a. I remember finding Mumbai in particular quite a. There
Yeah.
was a lot of smog. Basically, there was a lot of
Yeah,
stuff in the
yeah,
air.
yeah. So I mean, they were two-stroke, but they're not two-stroke anymore.
They're not too.
They,
Okay,
yeah, so they have moved on to four-stroke, but they've also moved on from petrol, diesel. So a lot of these vehicles are on CNG, uh,
right.
or or LPG, but still polluting in some sense.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
but better, right? But then the
slightly
fact
better.
that what you're doing then, and for every one of those you replace with an electric vehicle,
Yeah,
is improving the quality of life in the city, from a noise perspective and a air quality perspective.
absolutely, absolutely. So
Yeah.
three-wheelers is where we started, but for example, this year we're launching a bus that also charges 15 minutes, right? And
Oh wow, a bus. So
yeah,
that has got a considerably bigger battery. Then didn't know about the bus. Wow, that's
yeah, yeah. So
extraordinary.
that's a 300 kilowatt hour. It's like a 1 megawatt charging station. So that's coming up.
Wow,
Next
that's incredible. But then, so just explain what happens then. So can you go through the rudiments of why we're not charging at these speeds in the UK when we stop at the motorway charger? What is different between the chargers that people may have seen around Europe or North America and the chargers that you're operating?
Uh, yeah, well, I've tried to answer this question, trying to put myself in the shoes of engineers there, and I think, and this is a little bit of guesswork because I'm also trying to guess the decisions they're making versus what we're making.
Yes.
But I think fundamentally, like I said, in US, Europe, Australia, Japan, I think energy density seems to be the focus, which is how do I give you more range per cubic feet, per kg or per cubic feet,
Yeah.
because everyone's focusing on passenger vehicles,
Yeah.
passenger four-wheelers, where ergonomics, sex appeal, uh,
Yeah.
packaging, all that is very critical. So the choice of cells, the choice of packaging, the choice of technology is towards energy density. So how do I give you 500, 700, 800,000 kilometers of range? But like I said,
Right.
that's what that market's going after. And it makes sense because a lot of them will park at home, charge at home. Like I said,
Yeah.
the average kilometers per day is also much higher in a lot of these segments. In India, like I said, we need power density. And from a
Yeah.
technology point of view, these are actually fairly opposite things that you need to chase while building a battery. So in India, like for example, commercial vehicle space, we don't really care about the weight or the volume of the battery as much. If it's a 5 kg, 10 kg delta here and there, it doesn't matter because we're
Yeah.
talking about vehicles that are carrying tons, right? And it's not about the aesthetics for sure. but it's about life. For example,
Yeah.
like a lot of like choice of NMC, for example, for passenger four wheelers means you're probably going to be able to do 40 minutes to 1 hour of charging, uh, and you're okay with 1,000 cycle, 2,500 cycle sort of life. India, for
Right.
example, is very big on LFP, where the energy density is much lower,
Yeah.
but you're talking 2,000 to 3,000 cycles now.
Right.
So the life of the vehicle, hence the cost of the battery per kilometer that you're driving is much lower.
Yeah.
And so these are the I guess the choices that India is making, which is fundamentally different. Which is I need lower cost, longer life, really fast charging.
Yeah.
And like I said, because of the infrastructural constraints that we also have, and the price point constraints that we also have. Second thing is, I think it's about uh, the need to solve this from a two-sided point of view, right? What we realized early on, this is not just a cell technology problem or a battery design problem, or it's not just setting up charging stations. Right? You can't
Yeah.
approach this in silos. You need a battery pack that can accept this and a charging network that can reliably deliver this every day. So you
Right.
sort of have to look at this as a two-sided ecosystem creation problem. And for example, what happens in Europe, for example, is when you have the government enforcing something like CCS2, it's fairly limiting, right? With respect to, and it's an open protocol. Um,
Yeah.
so in some sense, that transaction is no one's problem, right? So if that transaction
Yeah.
doesn't work, is it the charge point operator's problem? Is it the charging
Or is it
manufacturing
them?
device problem? Or is it the battery problem?
Yeah.
Is it so it's and I think that in some sense is one of the problems with open protocols. And for example, Tesla has proven that if you control the battery and charging network, you get superior performance, superior reliability,
Yeah.
right? And the good thing about India is the government's incentivized a lot of private companies to get in and start creating technology, right? And for example, for Exponent, we can only solve this if you have our own proprietary standard,
Right.
where we control battery tech, we control our connector spec, because this is the current ratings, stuff like off-board cooling that we're doing, the charging network we need to set up is proprietary. So I think I think that freedom to innovate is fairly open.
Yeah.
And again, I guess maybe this is a specific point, for example, how the European Union works compared to
Yeah.
India's approach.
But so what? I mean, so that's the difference then, as opposed to either being a charging company that makes the charger or a car company that makes the car, including the battery. You're doing the entire thing. So you're building the charger, the connector that connects to the vehicle, and the battery pack, which is then inserted into, and that battery pack can go into effectively any vehicle. Could other manufacturers buy your battery packs and put them in their own vehicles yet, or is that something you're working towards, or are
Oh
you
yeah,
mainly just holding on to?
we already do that. So we don't build vehicles
Right,
today,
right,
right? Already. So it's other vehicle manufacturers who buy our battery technology and are adopt it.
right.
We're sort of like the Intel Inside. So what we work with OEMs is so vehicles come co-branded with us, but end users end up
Right.
realizing, hey, I need a vehicle. Uh, I need the right vehicle, but I also need the right energy partner, right?
Yeah,
So you bought a vehicle, but now you're actually using the energy partner on a daily basis. So your life, everything about from flexibility, network presence, reliability, how much you earn on a daily basis, for example, all comes down
yeah.
to the reliability and the presence of the energy partner. So that becomes a fairly impactful choice for consumers to make.
And so, can you? I mean, because what's exceptional is the speed that you charge, and when you charge a battery at high speed, that means you're putting enormous amounts of energy into it, very fast. So, can you explain the difference between, say, what I would describe as a 50 kilowatt rapid charger that I've used? It, they're quite common in Australia still. I mean, there are much faster ones already, up to. But what, in terms of kilowatt? Because can you explain the difference between that and what power you can put into a battery, and then how that is managed? Because that's what's really fascinating about your technology.
Right. Uh, So kilowatt by itself, I think, doesn't cover the problem statement, right? Because you
Right.
can have as much kilowatt of power from the grid as it's a pure commercial proposition,
Yeah.
right? I think it comes down to what's the C rate we're able to achieve at per cell level, right? So,
Yeah.
like now, if you have a smaller battery, even if you're charging it in 15 minutes, you probably only going to need 40-50 kilowatt. Let's say you have a 10 kilowatt hour battery,
Right. Right.
right?
Because
Charging it
it's
in
a
15
smaller
minutes
pack.
still only
Yeah.
needs, yeah, still only means a 40 kilowatt of power. Uh, now, but what that means is on a per cell basis, we're running it at 4C, while the industry standard is roughly 1C,
Right.
right? To 0.25. So 1C to 0.25C based on where you're looking at, right? So now how do you do 4C comes down to technology at the cell level, right? So we don't make cells, so we use regular cells. So we're not a material science company, but what we do is we use our own battery management system and a whole bunch of charging algorithms to real time predict if a cell is stressed or not. So this comes
Right.
down to something called anodic crowding. So when you charge a cell, there's a cathode, there's an anode. So the lithium ions go from the cathode, get absorbed by the anode, which is generally a foam-like substance. Now, the faster you charge, there's more current, which means there's more lithium ions, and it leads to something called lithium crowding around the anode. So there are two
Right.
ways to
So
solve it. One is,
the lithium starts to block. It just gets, there's just too much lithium trying to go in at one time. It gets stuck. It's like a
exactly.
traffic jam, I suppose. Yeah.
Exactly, like a traffic jam. Right? And so that's called a polarized state of a cell. And if we continue stressing the cell out in that condition, you have something called lithium plating, which is your permanent failure mode. And it's a triple
Right.
whammy. You've lost active lithium, it's irreversible. The internal resistance of the cell goes up. So your cell, for example, your phone starts lasting lesser hours, heating up more because of lithium plating. Right? And of course, the third whammy, the third negative of this is that you actually lose anode surface because you have lithium ion
Right.
plated. So the probability of this happening the next cycle keeps going up and up. So it's sort of a snowball effect. And so if you see lithium ion cell degradation curve, they sort of fall off a cliff at some point of time, right? And
Right.
that's because that whole effect goes out of control. And this is fundamentally because chargers and batteries don't understand each other. So today what a charger
Yeah.
does is CCCV, which is constant current, constant voltage charging, right? So the BMS says, hey, start charging, stop charging. And the charger is going to say, I'm going to give you same amount of current, and I don't really care about you as a cell, right?
Yes.
So what you're basically doing is you're blindly bombarding the anode with lithium ions. Now, if you do it
Yeah.
slower, you're still blindly doing it, but you're doing it with lesser probability of lithium crowding. If you do it rapidly, there's almost 100% chance of lithium crowding, lithium plating, right? So this is
Yeah.
where we are able, because of a two-sided approach, we're able to real-time understand if a cell is lithium crowded or not, and we're able to make
Right.
real-time decisions on the charging current, the charging profiles, and we realize this makes a drastic impact on ensuring cells are not stressed out, right? I mean,
Right.
and a fundamental thing is everything in life has gotten smarter, right? So, like for example, all of us have uh, smart watches and sensors telling us about our health and telling us what to do, when to do what. So we believe material science itself, trusting material science alone, is fairly limiting in how much we can
Right.
evolve. So everything in life has gotten smart. So even cells should get smart, and energy
Yeah.
management should get smart. So that's what we do.
But then I mean, the two things, as you've mentioned, is I'm using the bad analogy that I said about the traffic jam of lithium, but the other side is the heat. So that's one thing we're all aware of when, and it's particularly here, I'm very aware of it. I drove a Tesla here for about a month earlier this year, and it was very, very hot in Brisbane. And when I put it on the charger, this doesn't happen in the UK. It's too cold. Put it on the charger, and you suddenly hear all the fans going, and you feel this hot air coming from because it's desperately trying to cool the battery down because it's so hot. What we have to do in the UK is heat the battery up before we charge it. But then, then when you're charging a smaller battery pack at a higher with higher power, then presumably heat is. And in India as well, which is not a cold country generally, you've got to dissipate that heat. So that is fascinating. Can you explain how you manage the heat in
Yeah. So this is, I think, so because we solved problem statement one, which is the whole lithium crowding and the traffic jam problem.
Yeah.
So that allows us to rapid charge and without killing the cell. But because we just do step one, step two is just physics, which is heat, right? So when you, and heat is exponential, right? So when you go from, say, 4-hour charging to 15-minute charging, the current is 16 times more. Even if I go from 1-hour charging to 15-minute charging, the current is 4 times more, but the heat is 16 times more, right?
Okay, 16 times more. Okay, yeah.
When I go from 4-hour charging to 15-minute charging, the heat is 256 times more, right? So every time I'm cutting down charge time, the heat is exponential, right? And the other reality is this basic liquid cooling doesn't cut it, right? I mean, when you look at engines or processors or even desktop computers, your processor or your engine is allowed to be at 70 to the 120 degrees Celsius range, right? While your ambient is 40, 45. So you have a hot to cold temperature gradient to
Yeah.
extract heat efficiently. But in batteries, you want your cell to be in a 25 to 35 degrees Celsius spot, right? While your ambient
Yeah.
is 40, 45. So you have a negative temperature gradient. So you
Right.
need refrigeration, you need HVAC systems, right? Tesla, for example, has an onboard HVAC system, right?
Right.
And this is where the price point of India matters, because a lot of these, like the Tesla HVAC system, cost a few $1,000s, right, to put it on the vehicle. In
Yeah.
India, the vehicle itself costs $3,000 all
Right.
put together, right?
Yeah.
So probably the in the a segment that can afford it the least but needs it the most, right? And what we realized is heat generated while driving in India is much lower, right?
Right.
If you're not driving a Tesla, for example, you're not really gunning it. The amount of
Yes.
the C rate while driving on average is 0.2 C, 0.3 C, because you're taking 3 to 5 hours to discharge your vehicle. So it's
Yeah.
very little
Yeah.
heat while driving. But while rapid charging, suddenly there's a lot of heat. So we said,
Right.
why have all these thermal systems on the vehicle when you only need it while charging? So we actually have
Yeah.
something called an off-board cooling system or off-board heating system. So when you actually plug in a connector, our charger uh, cools the battery down or heats it up based on what the temperature is, and it manages. So it constantly pumps in coolant through the connector.
Right.
So it ensures that the battery is maintained in the ideal sweet spot temperature wise, while the BMS is obviously constantly checking for lithium crowding, lithium plating. The currents, the charging currents are constantly modulated. So it's sort of a handshake that we do in the first. We ensure the
Right.
thermals, the voltage profiles, and the current profiles are managed in that 15 minutes.
So and it is one connector. I mean, that's what's really just, I just love the design of that. So it's one connector that is delivering power, but also cooling in the same, am I correct with that? Is it that same unit that you plug in?
Yes, yes.
Right.
So it's got 3 pins. It's got the data pins, which is fairly standard for all connectors.
Yeah.
It's got the power pins, and with respect to power rating, for example, we do a 600 amp current rating for our
Right.
connectors, and that's critical because for rapid charging you need a lot more current.
Yeah.
And the third bit is the fluid pins that also make the same contact at the same time, and so
Right.
it sort of it creates a proper seal, and it's a pressurized system. So then
Right.
sort of we then jump up the fluid system to a 5 bar system that constantly
Right.
cooling the battery. And at the end
Right.
of it,
And
we
that can,
obviously suck out all the water, and then the vehicle's ready to go.
so, that's interesting. So when you finish charging and you unplug,
Yeah.
the coolant liquid is not staying in the battery pack. Is that
No.
right?
Yeah.
You take
Yeah.
it out, so you reduce the weight as well, presumably because of that.
Yeah, I mean, weight is negligible, but yeah, but we do that
Right.
just to ensure there's no spillage or anything.
Yes. Okay. So that's. But I mean, what that ends up as is incredibly simple to operate. I mean, from the point of view of the person operating the vehicle, really simple. They stop at the charger, they plug it in, it charges really quickly, they unplug it, and off they go. But what for you from your end, that's quite a complicated process to perfect. Because I think the important thing is often we've talked to companies that are developing a new technology, but this is already in operation. You've already got chargers. Am I correct? You've already got chargers operating.
Yeah.
You're charging lots of vehicles already. This is already in. It's been installed, as it were. There's an installed base of these vehicles.
Yeah. So we got close to 40 charging stations, 1,000 plus vehicles now on the road.
Right.
It's still part of a pilot,
Yeah.
right? And we've
It's
had, I
but
think,
it's
the
a big
longest
pilot.
It's a big pilot.
It's a big
Yeah.
pilot.
It's a business pilot, I would say, not an
Yes.
engineering pilot. But yeah, so I think the longest vehicle on the road now has been out there for a year and a half, 18
Right.
months or so. I think it's doing well. Yeah, and actually, we didn't even tell people that we do. So when we gave this to customers, we didn't want to complicate it about this whole liquid cooling and
Right,
all
yeah.
to us, that's an engineering problem, needs to be abstracted. For the customer, it's just a single plug,
Yeah.
and it's like charging anywhere else or like charging a fuel station. We very recently announced it, so it's sort of a secret thing that we're
Right.
doing under the hood.
Oh, so
Right.
there will have been people driving around with your batteries and your system who didn't really know that there was a coolant liquid going through their batteries when they were charging. I mean, they just charged it. That was it.
Yeah, for almost 6 to 8 months, this wasn't
Right.
public. I mean, of course, we sold to fleets. Obviously, I
Yeah,
guess the top management in these fleets knew about it,
they would
but
know.
obviously the
Yeah.
drivers on a daily basis didn't know about it. It was just for us to test, and even what you see today, I would call it the engineering MVP, right? So it's proving out performance, reliability, technology. We now have
Right.
something new coming out. It's obviously the same tech, but now we're actually launching a new product where everything from the connector to the charging station looks really, really cool. Right now, it's a
Right.
fairly simple box. There's a lot of
Yeah.
complex tech inside, but the productization journey is what we are now doing to now ensure
Yeah.
that it's a really cool looking charger, very
Yeah.
interesting looking connecting experience, etc. So that's
But
something
then
new.
that's really interesting because I mean, the information I've received so far is very much about small, light goods vehicles.
Yeah,
Three-wheeled light goods vehicles with a small battery pack. But then, so but you mentioned the bus. It is scalable. Then you can run the same system on a much bigger vehicle with a much bigger battery. Is the essential idea behind that the same, that you're using a coolant to keep that battery within a good
yeah.
operating temperature? Right.
Absolutely, it's fundamentally the same. So, like I said, the problem is always at a cell level. How many, what's the C rate you can
Yeah.
manage at a cell level? So beyond that, adding more cells is a pure multiplication problem for more
Yeah.
power. So of course, the bus is a 1 megawatt charging station. So what you end up needing is you need a lot more power.
Yeah.
Obviously, the chiller size goes up. So both the battery and the charger got to scale up in size. But
Yeah.
of course, connector experience, the fundamental technology and the concept remains
It's the same.
the same.
Right.
Yeah, and uh, uh, it. Uh, I mean, if you look at it, a bus battery just has a lot of smaller low voltage packs, right? So the
Yes.
bus, for example, is a 600-volt system. These three wheelers
Right.
that you look at is actually a 50-volt system. So we also realize voltages keeps changing for every segment. So our system adapts to each
Right.
voltage requirement.
Right. But then the one question I have really which is something that we're battling with I know in the UK and all over Europe, but not so much here in Australia, but such a big problem is the supply of power to the chargers. So I mean,
Yeah.
where particularly in like over congested areas where there's already a lot of demand for power, and then suddenly someone wants to put in 20 350 kilowatt chargers, and is there enough power there? How do you manage that? I mean, is within the Indian grid? Are you building the network, the power delivery network as well? Is that part of your business plan?
Yeah, I think this starts. I think the answer here is more from a macro standpoint,
Yeah.
where India is not a doesn't have access to fossil fuels, right?
Right.
So I think starting from the government, the policies, the incentives, the investments over the last 5 6 years, if you really track it, you'll realize the power surplus. We've sort of hit a power surplus point. Of course, I think with EVs coming in, we'll need to do a lot more. But
Yeah.
just the focus on renewables, for example, has been significant, and so that's a problem statement that that is constantly being worked upon. Of course, Exponent doesn't do anything there. So I mean, we
Right.
like to break this problem down into energy generation, distribution, the transfer, the transaction layer, and of course the application
Yeah.
layer. I think each problem needs solving, and we are
Yeah.
in the last two layers, which is around
Right.
transaction and storage, right?
Yeah.
And the honestly, uh, like in the middle of the city, you wouldn't see India needing 300 megawatt, 300 kilowatt charging
No.
stations,
No.
right? Because most vehicles have really small batteries. So even with our rapid charging, for example, we need maybe 40 kilowatt to 100 kilowatt charging stations, right?
Right.
Even for like even a mini truck in India would use a 20 25 kilowatt hour battery, which means a
Right.
100 kilowatt power at max. And what we realize with
Yeah.
rapid charging is you can sort of distribute the load across the city. You don't need a concept. So we're trying to go away from the concept of hubs, right? Where
Yes.
so with slow charging, what happens is you have this large hub where every vehicle comes and parks and slow
Yeah.
charges. But with rapid charging, what we're realizing is people just top up on the go all the time. So
Right.
energy, it's not like overnight suddenly all the vehicles have switched on charging, right? We're
Yeah.
seeing vehicles charge through the day.
Right.
In fact, none of our vehicles charge at the night.
Right.
And because they're charging in 10-15 minutes across multiple points, we're seeing a far more evenly distributed load
Right.
of this. So it's not very hard to get 100 kilowatt in a few locations.
A connection. Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. It is fascinating how it's quite a different model. And then have you noticed then the actual usage of your chargers is greater? Because when you mentioned the people would put in a charger and it would only be used 3 times a day, I'm assuming your chargers are used far more regularly.
Yeah. So actually, a lot of our chargers do 20 to 30 transactions a day, every day,
Right.
consistently. Right.
Right.
We have our top 5 chargers that do 40 to 60 every day.
Wow.
So
Wow.
so,
So they're
so we've
just
done
in
60
use
plus
pretty
transactions.
constantly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So we can handle all the way to 60 transactions per day per charger per gun. And when I say a
Right.
charger, we only have one gun per location. And that's what I
Yes.
was talking about, right? With rapid charging, you don't need multiple guns. You just need a single gun.
Yes.
So I would say energy is far more decentralized that way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So but on average, a lot of our locations, pretty much all our locations, do 20 to 30 transactions a day, which is
Right.
I think already the highest in the world.
Yes, that's got to be. Yes, yeah, that's huge. And one of the slightly painful things I've been going through as a visitor to Australia is having being able to pay for the electricity. Is the transaction for the user, for someone who's charging their vehicle, is that fairly straightforward using your? I mean, is that done on a kind of business contractual level, or could an individual go up to your charger, plug a car in, and with your system in it? But could they pay for that individually, or is that generally done? How do people pay for it?
Okay, so I think this is where we have the plug and charge model. The fact that we are charging our own batteries, so we know,
Yeah.
and this is another advantage of closed loop protocol as against open protocols is payments becomes very seamless, right?
Yes.
So for large fleets, we have a centralized billing system, so
Yeah.
drivers don't even pay. So
Yeah.
every vehicle is assigned to a particular fleet. We know which vehicles use how much energy, so we just bill it in the back end. And even for individual owners, we have an app so that helps you find a charging station, get navigate there, and of course,
Right.
payments wallets are integrated. India is huge on digital payments, right?
Yeah.
So we use that infrastructure quite seamlessly. So
Right.
there is actually no cash transaction, or there's no like pay using an app or QR code or anything
Right.
like that at the location.
Because that's the big advantage. Just to explain to people who might not understand that, is when someone plugs a vehicle in, your system knows the vehicle as well as the charger. And it knows what that vehicle is. Therefore, it can charge that vehicle. Effectively, you just plug it in, it starts charging, but you're still paying for it, which is like the Tesla model. It's like a closed model.
Exactly. So that's advantage. So we
Yeah.
know the battery, the vehicle ID, and the user ID. So
Yeah.
sort of all put in our system.
Which is kind of what we desperately need. When you're battling with a charger that you have to have the right app and the right RFID card, and you're 500 kilometers from anywhere, you're in the middle of Australia. You go, please make it work. I've driven all over Australia in electric cars, and they do work. But sometimes you're like this when you're coming up to the charger, you're going, please. It's
And
a nerve-wracking moment.
this was on a Tesla.
The Tesla is very easy, which is annoying. It always annoys me how easily I have a Tesla in the UK, and it's so simple. And you drive up and you plug it in and you walk. I don't even look. I just stick the thing in and walk away because I know it's going to charge. Whereas if you're using a different company's chargers, it can be frustrating. It's often down to my failing, but it should be. I can go into any shop in Australia and buy a banana or a can of drink like that. It's no problem. But to buy electricity from a charger can be very complicated, and that's my problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I totally
but
understand.
I'm so pleased you have resolved that. And I mean that I think what we're going to see in future is, and in a sense, what you're doing, I feel, is what many manufacturers should be doing. They should be solving the whole problem. They are now making really good cars, in China, in Europe, in North America, that have really long range and are really reliable and well made, but they don't do the charging. And the charging is critically important. And they should be developing the technology, maybe with others, to make that charging experience, without friction. You just plug the car in and you go. And the manufacturers aren't doing that. Yeah, and that's what's so good about your system, is that you've thought about the whole thing: the charger, the connector, the cooling, the battery, the entire package it's a really good solution as far as I'm a fan of what you've done.
Oh, thank you so much. That's big words. So, coming from someone like you, that means a lot. Yeah.
No, that is fantastic. So, I mean, what are your plans then to going from here? Obviously, you mentioned the bus. I mean, do you think you would ever develop a system for something that like private vehicles or taxis or things like that? Is that an area you're considering? I guess smaller four-wheeled vehicles, not necessarily buses. But I can't help it. I'm sorry. I'm just very enthusiastic about it. Trucks, you could do big intercity delivery trucks as well as small delivery vehicles. I mean, it lends itself to that so much.
Absolutely. So trucks, for example, is on the roadmap. The reason we chose buses is because it's easier to seed the vehicles and the network in one shot. So it was just the market that's up next. But as we use buses to electrify the highways, we then have a network that's paid for, and then that makes it easier to sort of lay up more categories on top of the network, starting from trucks, like you said. And India, fundamentally, the platform remains the same. So a truck platform, bus platform is actually almost the same. It's just built differently on top, right? So with passenger cars, we just haven't focused on it yet.
No.
Because it's there are very few manufacturers in that segment. Obviously, these are larger manufacturers. They take longer to adopt tech, and the integration process is far more intricate. What we realize, commercial vehicles is sort of built like boxes, so it's very easy for us to work with manufacturer, move from battery A to our battery, and quickly get going.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it is amazing. It's a really impressive system, and we've got some fabulous graphics that you've presented that really kind of help explain it, that we'll use in this. But I just find it's really encouraging, and also I think a lot of people, it's what we all do, but there's a lot of people in Western Europe and in North America and Australia here that kind of go, it's an electric vehicle for me. Does it work for me? And I just always want to say there's stuff going on around the world, in India, in China, in Malaysia, where they're developing new technologies and new ways of using electric ground transport that we're not even aware of. And so it's really exciting to come across your company, and what you're doing is really, it just makes you think, there's other solutions. There's not just Tesla and BYD. There's going to be a lot of other solutions.
I think there'll be a lot more unique solutions for every geography, for every segment. I think the cool thing with electric is and now that manufacturing technology is evolved, you don't need a million or 20 million pieces that look the same, feel the same, and they're sort of sold across the world, right? I think you'll have local geographies, local technologies sort of evolving. And I think every segment could have a very different solution.
Yes, yeah. But I mean, the thing that you have got there is, the potential for, say, a charging point on a highway. You could have a solar canopy. You could be generating a lot of the power that you need to use that. There's a lot of solutions that have evolved now, because what's changed in the last 10, 15 years is often cost. If you wanted to put a solar canopy up 10 years ago, it would cost a lot of money. It was really expensive. Now, solar panels are actually cheaper per square meter than a lot of roofing systems, so it becomes a more plausible option, doesn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. What you're saying is bang on, right? So, for example, within the city, we realize this economics don't work out because the real estate is super expensive. But on the highway, like you said, the real estate is at a very low cost, and you're right. Like solar canopies are at a point. We are at a tipping point there as well. So we could have a very smart integrated solution. Also having some sort of battery back buffering that allows us to manage power reliability, like grid reliability issues and things like that. So I think that sort of integrated solution is definitely what we're heading towards.
Yes. Aaron, it's been wonderful to talk to you, wonderful to meet you and hear what you're up to. And I mean, all I hope is that we can meet again and we can talk again when when you're at your next step, because it's a fascinating journey you're on. And hopefully one day, somehow we'll get to India, and it would be wonderful to meet you and see what you're doing in action. I mean, that would be it's my big ambition is to get back to India, because I did love your country when I visited. So I hope I can get back there one day.
That'd be awesome. And nothing to do with Exponent. We would love to host you. We'd love to take you around the EV scene in India. Just love to.
Yeah, no, it'd be great. No, we've got to do it. But that is brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real joy talking to you, and a really fascinating technology. And all power to you. I hope you go on to much bigger and greater things. It's really good. Thank you so much,
Robert. Thank you so much for your kind words. And thanks so much for your time. Wonderful chatting with you.
Please support our Stop Burning Stuff Patreon and help us tackle misinformation about electric vehicles and clean energy.
Really hope you enjoyed that. Do tell your friends about the show. Do tell your friends about the podcast. Do subscribe if you haven't already. That does help us. Doesn't make any difference to you. Doesn't cost any money. But it does let you know when we've got new episodes up, which is regularly. And as always, if you have been, thank you for watching.